I would like to introduce my next guest. You know, when you read bios about guests that you have on, sometimes the bios are so long, you figure by the time you finish reading them, there's no time left for the interview. But Nina was brought to my attention via, I guess, her agent or your publicist,
Yeah,
Michael, which your publicist, who was a fan of Twisted Sister and wanted me to become aware of what you did. And I have to say, you know, back in the day when things were just easier and when there was only, you know, 9 channels on TV and there was only like 4 radio stations, everybody knew everything. Everybody knew what was number one. Everyone knew what was happening because the avenues were so small. But today there's millions of things out there and there's millions of avenues out there. And there's a huge amount of incredibly talented people. And thanks to TikTok and Facebook and Instagram, a lot of the people who wouldn't be recognized are being recognized. And Nina DiGregorio, who is my next guest, is an incredible electric heavy metal rock violinist who was brought to my attention through her publicist. So, of course, like most people, you go online and you look at this thing and you go, how did I not know this? How did I not know this person? How could this slip under the radar? Well, she's not going to slip under the radar any longer because she's on my show. So I'd like to welcome Nina DiGregorio. Thank you very much for being on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Where are you speaking to me from at this point?
Actually, normally I do interviews from my studio at my home in Las Vegas, but we're 3 days off on the East Coast right now. My parents happen to live in Western New York. So I'm speaking to you from their house in Lewiston, New York, actually. And I considered doing this from their basement where they have like a desk set up, but I was like, I can't do an interview from my parents' basement. That just sounds bad. So I'm outside.
Well, it's beautiful weather. I listen, I don't know if the heat wave is about to hit you. They tell us it's about to hit us in New York City, but you're from Vegas, so I don't need to tell you about heat waves now, do I?
No, definitely not. I live in Vegas, but I grew up here in Lewiston, New York, so I'm used to the rain comes in and the humidity comes in, and that's about where we are right now. It feels like it's about 90.
You are north of Buffalo, as a matter of fact.
Yes, about 30 minutes north of Buffalo, right where the Niagara River meets Lake Ontario.
Do you get those lake effect snows that we hear about all the time when I'm watching the TV weather reports and they say lake effect snow is blah, blah, blah? Is that what you guys get?
It's funny because when I was growing up here, I would listen to the radio in the morning for the school closings, and all the Buffalo area schools would be closed for snow. My school in Lewiston was never closed because once you go over the escarpment where the falls is and you're kind of protected by being down below, they never get the snow here that they get 30 minutes away in Buffalo off of Lake Erie. So yeah, they'll get some snow, but nowhere near the extent that Buffalo gets.
Well, being also from that area in New York State, you're also a Buffalo Bills fan. I know that.
Yes, Bills Mafia, avid fan.
Big Josh Allen fan. I know that.
Yes.
You know, listen, I'm a New York guy, but I love football and I'm fully aware of how good they have been. And I'm fully aware of how Josh Allen has been, and also was aware during the incredible run they had, I guess, when they had the 4 Super Bowls that unfortunately they lost, and one of them was to the Giants, which is my team. But it's a storied franchise, and you're having a good run, and hopefully you're going to have to get through, unfortunately, what may be the greatest quarterback who's ever lived on the craziest team, you know, with Kansas City being who they are. But you guys were always in the mix, so good luck to you.
Yeah, our motto is, well, there's always next year. And I feel like as long as we have Josh Allen, we're in the running. I mean, I grew up mostly through the drought. So having Josh come onto the team it brought hope where we never had it before. So, you know, he's the key. And as long as he's there, we've got a shot, I think.
Yeah, well, listen, I'm a Mets fan. The always next year is the motto we live by.
I'm a Yankees fan. It's the only reason I've known victory in my life, because other than that, I've got the Bills and the Sabres. So
see, I'm wearing an F1 hat, by the way, right now. And, you know, I didn't even know what that meant. To be honest, my wife bought me this hat in Mexico because I needed a hat to wear. And she bought me this hat, F1. I'm walking around and people are going, hey, man, who's your driver? And I'm like, who? My Uber driver? Like, what are you talking about? And then every day somebody stops me on the street and says, so now I just say Red Bull and I move on to the conversation. So
funny.
Um, so look, watching your videos were amazing. Your playing is incredible. Um, Take me to how this evolved from classical music, because I know that you wanted to become a sax player at first. And you know what's interesting about saxophone? One of my guitar teachers years ago said to me, "You want to become a good guitar player, listen to sax players because they get in between the notes." And guitar players don't get in between the notes. He goes, but the emotiveness of the sax tone gets in between the notes. Now you are a violinist. Did that ever come into your mind? Did you ever, was it the tonality of the sax? What was it that drove you to where you are now?
I think that it started with the type of music I was listening to very young. I was into the roots of rock and roll stuff as a kid, which was, I guess kind of odd for being the age that I am, that I was listening to that kind of music. But the saxophone was the predominant solo instrument, in a lot of that music. And so I was drawn to early roots of rock and roll stuff. And I think that's why I wanted to play. And as I got older, jazz always fascinated me because I'm not a trained jazz player. I'm a trained classical player who listened to rock music, and jazz was kind of this weird middle section that I had no knowledge about. But I took a few courses in school where I played in jazz ensembles, and the jazz teachers would tell you, if you want to learn how to be a good soloist, transcribe the solos that you really like, and you will learn how to become a better soloist yourself. That's how the jazz players do it. And again, listening to saxophone players and trying to figure out what they're doing in some of the solos over chord progressions, I think that I was just always really fascinated by that. And the sax has a way of, like you said, playing between the notes or being able to bridge different styles. And the violin is really versatile as well. It's just not as commonly used, I don't think. It's becoming more commonly used, but there's so many things you can do. So many people think that what I'm doing is fake because they're like, you're making pick sounds, but you're not using a pick. But you can very well make pick sounds if you know how to use bow control. So it's very new to people. And I think that's why it's catching on, is because it's so unique, probably.
Well, growing up for me, I was born in 1952. So of course the doo-wop era was important, and there was a lot of sax. Most of the fun stuff was the sax playing. Even the Dave Clark Five, which was a rock band and that rivaled the Beatles, their primary lead instrument was a sax player
Right.
who blasted that sax all over the place, and it was like always great. But um while I was, developing as a hippie and going into the Fillmore East and seeing bands in those days, violinists started to come into the world that I was in. So I would see bands like It's a Beautiful Day. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but the song Whitebird, I believe that was the big
Yes.
song, was a very popular song. And David and Linda LaFlame were in the band, I think. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That was, um, 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 God, it wasn't It's a Beautiful Day, but they were part of the Flock. Excuse me, they were A Beautiful Day, but there was a group called the Flock, and they also had a violin player. And Papa John Krieg was
Right.
a violin player that played with the Jefferson Airplane, the Jefferson Starship, and with permutations of the Grateful Dead. And so you would see these guys playing at the Fillmore, and I was a guitarist. And to me, the violin was such an abstract instrument. It was such a weird, like no frets. Like, how do you do it? How do you get vibrato? How do I became fascinated with the study of what it took to become a great violinist. That really is it. I didn't play violin. I have never played violin, but I became obsessed with the technique that it takes somebody to learn how to do and how to play a violin. And finally, last year, I went to Carnegie Hall and saw the Berlin Philharmonic perform Mahler's Seventh Symphony.
It's about as good as it gets.
And I had never been to Carnegie Hall to see a classical music concert. I'd seen I saw, believe it or not, Jeff Beck at Carnegie Hall. I saw David Bowie at Carnegie Hall. I saw James Taylor at Carnegie Hall. I saw Stevie Wonder at Carnegie Hall. I saw the Beach Boys at Carnegie Hall, but I never saw classical music. So friends of ours said, you've got to go to Carnegie Hall. And I'm sitting there and I'm watching a 120-piece orchestra with like 15 violin players. And then the lead player, this one particular woman, she was first chair. And I'm sitting there going, oh my God, like, oh my God, what does it take, Nina, to get there? Like, what does that, and what is the difference in the first chair and the 18th chair at the Berlin Philharmonic? I mean, the 18th chair doesn't suck, right?
No, not
So,
at all. At that
so
level,
tell me, yes. So tell me, what is it like? How much work does it take to get there? And where did you take your learning curve to where you are now and make the decision that you have made to be who you are at this point?
so in order to be a really good violinist, you have to start young before your muscles are fully developed. I think that anyone that starts too late, it's the way that the instrument is, it's too difficult. So you'll find that a lot of these people started at 3, 4 years old. I started at 9 on violin. I started at 6 on piano. 9 is late, actually, for a violinist. I think that your muscles need to be trained to do violin techniques while they're growing. And if you try and learn a new technique when you're already an adult, it's much more difficult to train your muscles to do it, which is what I found out when I recently taught myself how to do finger tapping on a violin. And as an adult learning how to do something new where my muscles weren't used to doing it, I think it took me a lot longer than it would have if I had done it when I was 7 or 8 years old. But I don't think that really existed at that time. But it requires daily practice from the time you're very, very young for many hours. And my early training, I followed the classical path. I played in the all county orchestras and the all state orchestras, and I did the New York State solo competitions. And I did all of that right up to college. I did pursue music in college. I have a master's degree in classical violin. But at some point, my teachers wanted to push me towards conservatory, and I didn't want to go that route. It's a very difficult, cutthroat, competitive, and I loved rock music. I grew up listening to rock guitar players. I grew up listening to Jimmy Page and David Gilmour and Rush and Alex Lifeson and Eddie Van Halen, and I wanted to do what they did only on the instrument that I was trained to do. And I started to splinter off probably about 13 years old when I saw my dad watching a DVD of Woodstock, and I saw Jimi Hendrix play the Star Spangled Banner. And that was like the moment where I plugged my cheap little electric violin into a guitar amp and started messing with the settings, trying to get certain sounds out of the violin. There's a lot of great violinists, and some of them were using effects, but there's hardly nobody that was using effects exactly the way a guitar player would use them, or bending the strings sideways like a guitar player would do, or using finger tapping the way Eddie Van Halen did. And I was determined to try and translate all of those guitar techniques to the instrument that I was trained on. And I'm still learning. I mean, every time I cover a new famous guitar solo, I learn something new that gets incorporated into my own style. So, I mean, I think I splintered, even though I played classical music through college, I started to go the rock route as an early teen.
At what point did you hear Terry Kath's guitar solo on 25 and 64 and said, I think I'm going to cover that?
I became a fan of Chicago thanks to my dad and my uncle, who were big horn band fans. So they were playing Chicago in the house when I was 12, 13 years old. And I remember watching some videos on YouTube of Terry Kath live. He was gone before I was born. I never got to see him, but I did get to see Chicago a few times live. And I remember just thinking certain musicians just have the joy in them. I don't know how better to explain it, but when you watch them perform, there's like this joy that comes from a higher source. And Terry Kath had it, and Eddie Van Halen had it, and Leonard Bernstein had it when he conducted the New York Phil, where you just feel this joy through them. And I think Terry Kath really struck me in both his guitar playing and his singing. And that was one of the first guitar solos I transcribed. And I got to go to a Chicago show in the Buffalo area. And I think we had backstage passes, and I showed them my transcription. I was a young teen at the time, and they autographed it for me and kind of gave me one of those, keep going, kid, good job. Have never seen that since Terry did it, and so it was really cool to have that opportunity when I was first starting out like that.
I was lucky enough to see Chicago with Terry when They were called Chicago Transit Authority back in those days at the Fillmore.
Right, right.
And you know, I'm sure you have read in interviews that Jimi Hendrix considered Terry Kath to be the greatest guitar player. Terry Kath's playing on that song is so joyful and so out there. You know, there was a lot of out there guys. Growing up during the 60s and luckily having the greatest players in the world play for basically me in New York City at the Fillmore every weekend. You know, you got to see them all.
It's
So
amazing.
you got to see them all. And, you know, they were all so unique and all so different and also special. And they seemed to just all be doing it because they loved it. It wasn't such a contrived idea yet in their heads. And I saw Jimmy on a bad night. I saw Hendrix on a bad night. And I saw him on a great night. And I saw him at Madison Square Garden when he first played, and it was a bad night. And the PA system was the PA system on the roof. It was really the public address system. There wasn't really a rock PA back in those days. It was the public address system they used for hockey games
That's
and
right.
basketball games. So there was no foldback speakers. There was nothing. And the Marshall amp stretched across a whole stage, and it was in the center of the stage, center of the floor. And as the stage turned around, if you weren't in front of the amps, you didn't hear the guitar playing anymore. So if you were a fan, you walked around the arena and always stayed in front of the amplifiers. But the point is, Jimmy had a bad night that night, and he I guess I think I was talking to Eddie Kramer, his engineer producer, who said that he was on acid or something, and that he kept on asking people not to go with the flash bulbs because it was too disconcerting for him. Anyway, you know, I saw him 9 months later at the Fillmore during Band of Gypsies, and I had 10th row center for that, and I was at the show that was recorded for the album, and I remember thinking, I'm watching the greatest guitar player of my life. I remember sitting there just going, John, don't forget what you're looking at right now. This is something really special. But you know, Jimmy did something with his guitar and his amp that nobody had done before, which is he merged a Stratocaster with a Marshall amp. Trust me, they were never built to work together, and no one had ever heard that sound. So when you are emulating your heroes and you're doing such a great job, because believe me, I listened and I watch you and I can see what you're doing and I can hear what you're doing. How much does the amplifier come into play? Like, how loud are you guys on stage? Give me your your setup there, and how much you use the amplifier and the stage sound to give you back what you need to put on your performance.
So if you're an analog guy, you're probably going to hate me for saying this, but the violin is a little different than the guitar. I've tried many, many different amps with a violin, and the amps that sound great with the guitar sound very harsh with a violin. In the days when I used to use an amp, I used a bass amp to play. I have a Mark bass amp. I also play bass guitar, and I found that it sounded better with the violin. But on my tour dates and on my videos, I'm mostly using amp sims now, because with a violin, I can't duplicate the good sounds with a live amp, and I can't control it in the mix for the shows that we do. When you're trying to have a group with 4 violinists and a backing rock band behind you who also sing, it's very hard to control the mix. Like, our front of house guy is my husband usually is doing it. He's a production guy. It's not the easiest thing in the world to try and control. So I think some of my early videos, like Stairway to Heaven and 25 or 6 to 4, I used an amp on in those recordings that I put out. Everything else, I'm using the Helix family of sounds, but I also have a pedal board that I've created with a combination of digital and analog pedals so that it does what I need it to do. So I'm using a lot of amp sims for my stuff, which I know is sacrilege, but I'm just telling you, violin it's different trying to get a good sound out of it.
To make you feel better, our last 2 tours, I used a Kemper. Okay.
Okay.
You know, I had the Marshalls all behind me, but I was going right into a Kemper.
Yeah.
You know, I was going to a Kemper because it was much more easier to control it, easier to have a consistent sound every night. You could push a button, you knew it was there, you were going to do it. In fact, the truth of that was, going back to our Christmas album, Twisted Christmas, I remember my friends calling me, go, yo, man, great guitar tone, man. What'd you use? A 65 it did, which amplifier? And I have like a lot of them. And I said, I hate to tell you, but I used a Line 6, which has a chip that probably cost 13 cents in China. And I was able to get this guitar sound I wanted on a daily basis. And I hate to tell you that, but I did. So, no, I understand. You have to deal with the limitations that you're dealing with. The fretted violin. I know you're endorsed by Yamaha.
Yeah.
I had never, until I saw your videos, I didn't even know that you could have that. When did that become a thing?
Well, Mark Wood, who was in the beginning of the Trans-Siberian Orchestra, and he's a really famous rock violinist. He invented that instrument probably before I was born, and he was playing it himself. And now he produces these, on a mass scale. They're all handmade instruments. And I had known about the Viper violin, and early in my career when I was touring with other artists as like a hired gun per se, I really didn't need more than 5 strings on the violin, and I didn't need a fretted violin. So my 5 string fretless was enough for everything I was doing. When I started doing my own show and I started adding in all of this guitar repertoire, I really didn't want to ever have to use a studio trick to sound like the guitar player. Anything that I record and put out, I want to be able to duplicate live. And I was running into the problem of not having the range on the violin. The top string of a violin is an E and the top string of a guitar is an E, but the violin E sounds an octave higher than the guitar. So you can't very well just tune it like a guitar, because by the time you get to the bottom string, it's so loose it's just flopping around. It's just not working that way. So I ended up having a custom made 7 string violin from Mark Wood. And when I started learning eruption, I tried to do tapping on the fretless violin, and it was pretty much impossible. And so when I had the violin made, I wasn't even sure if the frets would help, because it's very different. You have a curved bridge on the violin. On the 7 string, the strings are very close together. They're much higher off the fretboard. Flat wound versus round wound strings make a difference. The tension on the strings is so great that if you try and do finger tapping on a guitar, you can still make a sound even if you're not plugged in. But on a violin, there's no sound at all trying to do it. And you're supposed to play on top of the frets when you play on a violin. Totally different way of playing. So I got the instrument, and it sounded like complete garbage. Like my family wanted to move out for a few months when I was trying to get it to make sounds, because the gain that you have to put on, the amount of boost to make it speak and make sound is so hot that you breathe on the instrument and it's feeding back. So then I had to figure out, how do I take care of that noise in that situation? And I found that by doing the finger tapping just behind the fret, I was able to bend the string just enough to be able to do that technique. So the main reason I got a fretted instrument was to attempt to see if I could do finger tapping on the instrument with it. Of course, it helps with some other things, like power chords and pinch harmonics are a little easier with a fretted violin. Also, if your in-ears happen to go out, in the middle of a show, or if you have a really bad mix, having that muscle memory under your fingers where you can feel something is a little helpful. The violin is not the easiest instrument to play in tune if you can't hear yourself. So, there's uses for it. I still find the fretless instrument easier for me to play than this gigantic 7 string. I have really tiny hands, but it has uses for guitar techniques that I couldn't do with a fretless violin. So that's why I perform on multiple different violins now, depending on what I'm trying to do justice for the artist that I'm covering.
Who makes the strings? What
Uh,
companies do you go to?
so the top 5 strings, the E, A, D, G, C, which are same as violin viola strings, you can use any violin viola strings for that. The bottom strings, the lower ones, there's a B flat string and an F string. Those are custom made, and Mark Wood has a deal with a company that will custom make them. For a while during COVID, they went defunct and you couldn't get them. So basically it was, don't break those strings because you're not going to get another one. And, from what I understand, he kind of tried out all different sizes of strings and tensions, from string bass strings to cello strings, to shortening them to get the correct tension, thickness, and length to be able to put those really low, thick strings on a violin. And it requires a different kind of bow and a different kind of rosin to draw sound out of those thick strings on the 7 string.
Who makes the pickups in the violin?
The one that I have is a Barbera pickup. So, from what I understand, he's been in business doing this at a pretty high level. They're in the bridge, piezos, and been doing this for decades. So that's the one that's used on the Viper. Yamaha has their own proprietary pickups on their instruments. The ones on my fretted violin are Barbera pickups.
So you are going wirelessly, or you're plugged into what device on stage?
So we are wireless because in the production show that I wrote, it's called Femmes of Rock. There are times when we run out through the crowd and perform as well. So our
So you don't use a 200-foot cord, is what you're telling me. Is that
no,
right?
no. We use wireless units, and there's a lot of wireless going on the stage. And actually, 2 nights ago in Ohio was the first time I ever had such a bad problem with the wireless that I had to get rid of it and just plug a cable in during the middle of the show. But we've done hundreds of shows, and that was the first time that's happened. So usually we're wireless into our pedal boards, and then we're out to the board, and we have in-ear monitors. So we're completely free to roam around through the crowd or on stage or do whatever we need to do. But man, I was having such terrible hits in my ears, and no matter what channel we switched it to, we couldn't fix it. So the middle of the show, I ripped the thing out, put a cable in, and that was that.
How long are your sound checks?
The setup is much longer than the actual sound check. Our technician, like I said, usually it's my husband, who is also a show producer. He has to get there about noon, and it takes him probably until 2 or 3 o'clock to get all of the gear set up. We run our show, a lot of wireless gear, in-ear monitors. They all need to be scanned and checked, and we bring our own stuff to the gigs. Drums need to be mic'd. Rhythm section needs the sound check before the strings do. We have to make sure that the M32 console is all routed properly. We have video content that syncs with our show that all needs to work. And so everything's on a click track because the video syncs with the show. So it's a lot of setup. By the time the strings get there, if everything's working properly and there's no hits in our ears and there's no patching problems or anything like that, we could be out of there in 30 minutes time at that point. But the setup is a lot longer than the sound check is, just because I always tell people it's more of a production show and less of a band. It just the way that we run it, because of the video content and all the show elements, it's just a little more like a production show setup than a band setup.
We're going to take a break for a word from our sponsors, and we will be back in a couple of minutes. I have to read some copy right now. Okay. So just bear with me, and then we'll continue on. Okay. And someone has to pay for this.
Or what would you think of plugging in the previous ones, or do you want to record?
We could, but I just kind of have it down like much quicker.
Sounds good.
I'm going to just try to read it through. Let me just pull out the other sheet. Okay, here we go. You all heard me talk about DiMarzio pickups. These are the pickups that I use on my guitar. I want to tell you a little bit about them. They've been helping guitar players achieve their sound for half a century, and you've heard them on recordings by Eddie Van Halen, Kurt Cobain, Kiss, Boston, Def Leppard, Steve Vai, Twisted Sister. I mean, just about everybody I know has been using DiMarzios, and I've been using DiMarzios since 1977. They have hundreds of different varieties. They've got humbuckings. They've got Tele-style pickups. If you play electric guitar, you know of DiMarzio, and if you haven't used them, you should. And if you buy DiMarzio through my advertisement, and you use JJF 2024, you'll get a 15% discount online. So it's a 15% discount using the code JJF. That's just the letters JJF for JJ French 2024 at checkout, and get a 15% discount. I also want to tell you really quickly about ToneQuest. Now, ToneQuest magazine, there's a lot of guitar magazines out there, and a lot of them have advertising, and you start to wonder, do they give the best reviews to the companies that buy the most ads? I always ask myself that question, but there's this one magazine that I read called ToneQuest, and they don't use ads. And they just report what's there. And I happen to love them, because more than ever, we're confronted with so many different voices of proclaimed experts and social media influencers, and endless possibilities of finding the right combination of guitars, amps, amp mods, tubes, speakers, effects, and placements. There is no shortcuts. Look, it's your money, it's your tone. Choose wisely. Just understand this, that ToneQuest is an expert authority on tone. ToneQuest will enhance your relationship with your guitar. Trust me, it enhances my relationship with my guitars. ToneQuest saves you time and money. I have purchased guitars and amps that I've read about in ToneQuest, and I love all of them. And there's a discount code. If you go online to tonequest.com and you subscribe. You use the discount code MyTone. That's MYTONE, all caps, MyTone, and get a discount. And it's a great magazine. And now back to the interview. You got Matt? You got that?
Yep.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay, cool. Smoother than last week, I think.
No, those sound great. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Well, you know, I'm old enough. I should get better anyway.
Okay.
So we're back with my guest, Nina DiGregorio, who is an electric violinist. Beautiful woman. I don't want to, you know, put the sex component in there for cheesy effect, but the fact is that visuals are visuals and presentation is presentation. And you, Nina, have put together an incredibly good show, and the band looks great. So tell me and take me through the evolution of your live performances and why you've made the choices that you've made currently with your performing technique and the bands that you've been playing with.
So my professional career started right out of school. I was in my last year of school. I had taken a vacation to Las Vegas to visit a few cousins that lived there. And I was in college in Buffalo at the time, University at Buffalo. And I went to a show. There's a group called the Shintas, and they were a musical comedy show, and they were headlining the Vegas Strip, but they were originally from Buffalo. So we knew them from the Buffalo area, went to the show. After the show, went to chat with them and hang out, met Wayne Newton's music director. And they had just lost a violinist in their show. And of course, the guys were like, oh, she's the greatest violinist. You have to talk to her. And so they offered me a job to play in Wayne Newton's orchestra. I ended up
How old were you at this point?
20 nothing. I mean, you know,
Okay.
college.
And Wayne Newton, for those who don't know the name, he is Mr. Las Vegas, isn't he?
Right.
He's probably the most legendary longtime performer in the history of the Strip. Would that be a fair statement to make?
Yeah, I mean, other than Elvis, you know, maybe Vegas legend for sure, Wayne Newton. So I was like, I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to go to medical school. I wanted to be a neurosurgeon. I did music still. I got a degree in music, but I really wanted to be a doctor. I was like, you know what? This will be fun. I'll move to Vegas for a couple years. They have a music program at UNLV. I'll get my master's degree while I'm there. And then after I do this a few years, I'll go to medical school.
Can you just stop for 1 second? You want to be a neurosurgeon? Let me just go back here. So in other words, you don't really have high-minded goals, do you, in your life? You know, no, I mean, like, I'll just be a neurosurgeon. You know, that's okay.
That's what I wanted to do pretty much my whole life I read books about the brain when I was 8 years old. I wanted to be a doctor. And, you know, I did music, but it was kind of I never thought it would be a career at the time. So I got the job with Wayne Newton. I moved to Las Vegas. I enrolled at the college there so that I could get my master's degree. And after Wayne Newton, I got a job they offered me a job in Toni Braxton's band to be her solo violinist. After that, I got the call to do some solo work with David Foster on some dates with him. And so pretty much like it was like The Godfather. When you try and get out, they pull you back in. Something good kept happening. And then all of a sudden one day I was like, you know what? I think I'm just a professional musician now. I don't think I'm going to be a doctor. So after playing in other people's bands, you know, it's built a great resume. And as a orchestral performer, playing violins or horns or something, the best you can do is to be a session player or to play in someone famous's band. That's what you do. And so I did that for a long time. I built a resume and I took something, even the music that wasn't my kind of music, like the pop music or the R&B music. I'm an old rocker. Like I got to play with Cheap Trick and Deep Purple, and those were like two of the greatest gigs that I ever did because I'm an old rocker, like I said, at heart. But all of the shows I was in, I learned something from. And so through that, like I would say, you know, 8 to 10 years of being in other people's shows at the beginning of my career, I was able to develop my own show and be better at a lot of things because I watched so many pros do it from behind the bandstand for so long. And at some point I was offered a tour, I think, and I was like, you know what? Every time you take a tour as a backing musician, you go, it's great, it's fun, you get to play with the band and you get to, you know, make some money doing it. But then you come back and you're a year older or you're 2 years older and your own thing has just been kind of pushed back. And, you know, So I kind of made a conscious decision to start saying no to those gigs, and I stopped being a hired gun per se, and I developed my own show. And it was a risk because I owned a house at the time and I still had to pay for it. And I was like, I'm going to put all my eggs in this basket, go full force for it and see what happens. And luckily it panned out for us, short of the blip of COVID where we couldn't tour or do anything like that. It has worked out so far. And now I just pretty much do my own show.
And is that with Femmes of Rock or the Bella Electric Strings? Or tell me how you divide that up exactly.
So the first thing I developed was Bella Electric Strings, which is a corporate entertainment act in Las Vegas. You really make your money doing corporate events. Companies, large companies, Verizon, MasterCard, whoever, insurance companies will come and host their events for a week. They'll have keynote speakers and then they'll have parties afterwards, and they hire entertainment for all of that. And they write the checks and the checks clear, and it's easy work. It's not the most of the time we get good audiences, sometimes your background entertainment. So I put together a group that was modular. You could book one electric violinist, you could book an electric quartet to backing tracks for corporate events. I pulled myself out of performing in that group when I got too busy with the touring show. So I don't play in that group, but I still manage it and book it, and I write all of the charts for the group and produce the music for it. So that group still does 200 to 250 corporate events per year, and that's like our smaller corporate version. Then I took that concept.
Let me just say this. This is your entrepreneurial side.
Yeah.
Right. This is the entrepreneur. This is the business part of the
Right.
music business that people do not understand.
It
You
pays
have
the
fully,
bills.
you have
Yeah.
fully embraced the two words that I always tell musicians you have to embrace. It's called the music business. And you embrace the business side of it. So you're entrepreneurial, which is wonderful. You run a company that moves completely independently, and then you have your band.
Right.
Okay. And what year did that start? Did you actually start with Femmes of Rock?
I think I had been doing the Bella Strings thing peripherally with everything else in my career the whole time I was in Las Vegas. And at some point, there was a guy who came to one of the corporate events and said, "Do you ever do ticketed shows? People would love to buy a ticket and see something like this." Because I was doing the Terry Kath solo, even with backing tracks in this small group. And he's like, "I've never seen anything like this." And he had a theater. And so I said, "Well, sure. Yeah, we'll do a show." And so I said yes. And I had like a year to develop the show then. And I wrote specialized arrangements. We worked singing into the show. We put video content to make it less of a like small corporate act and more of a production show. And it was really just by fate that I happened to do that. And it was probably like, I don't know, 8 to 10 years ago when I started to develop the show. So since like, I think 2018 might have been like our breakout year where we started to get a lot of tour dates. 2019 was great. 2020 was set to be our best year yet. And then everything got wiped out. And now it's taken us 4 years to build back to where we were in 2019. And that's where we are this year. We've got quite a few tour dates again, and we're at the level we were at prior to COVID. But something good did come of COVID. I had social media pages, but I mostly just posted about my live shows. I didn't create content specifically for social media. During COVID, when we couldn't tour, I started taking the guitar solos that I played in my live show and recording them and putting the videos out on social media, specifically for social media. It blew up, things went viral, and now I have, hundreds of thousands of followers on these pages who also buy tickets to the live shows when we tour. So I found this new way to kind of boost our live tour dates while creating this content for social media. I also learned how to engineer myself on recordings, which I couldn't even do at the beginning of COVID. I had to always have someone else doing it. And, so I can record the things. And then my husband, who does production and a lot of that stuff, he'll do the mixes and final recording and stuff like that. But I can get through a session on my own now and not need any help doing it. And that was something I could never have done before. So, learning a new skill, both with engineering recordings and with social media and how it works, I think has been beneficial. And that people give the crazy thing to me is people who only know me from social media and didn't know what I did prior to that, they think I'm like a phony. They're like, oh, all you ever did was from your house. Did you ever get out there and do something? Like, yeah, I did get out there and do things. You just don't know that I did, you know? So, people take a lot of flack sometimes for being social media stars, but people don't do the research to even Google someone to see if they have a career or not, So,
Well, there's always naysayers and there's always jealousy. I always say that it's always interesting to me when people get snarky about performers, and I go, you know what? The difference between the successful people and everyone else is they're the people who are getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and putting the hours in day after day, year after year. You don't get to be great overnight. And most people want to sit on their couch and they don't want to put those years in. Twisted spent 10 years in the bars learning how to do what we did. It's as simple as that. We put the hours in. There's no way around it. You have to put the hours in. When you put the hours in, you get out of it what you get out of it. I don't believe, that phrase they say insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. When it comes to performances like musicians and athletes, doing the same thing over and over actually, when you don't even realize it, incrementally makes you better. You keep doing it and you do it and you do it and you do it. And maybe one night you screw up here, but you're never going to make that mistake again. The next night you may screw up something else, but you're never going to make that mistake again. Repetition is our friend. It is not our enemy. Discipline is our friend. It is not our enemy. Excellence is our friend. It is not our enemy. Tenacity is our friend. It is not our enemy. You have all of those characteristics. That's why you have become successful. I applaud you for that. I applaud entrepreneurs. I applaud entrepreneurs who follow in the business of personal development like this, because it can be lonely. It's another thing too. There's a loneliness about excellence. You're out there just doing it, and people don't understand how many hours it takes to become great at what you do. I said this to my wife on a number of occasions. I'd be listening to the radio driving, right? And I'm hearing like Neil Schon play the solo, on some Journey song. And I go, God, it could be a violin. Listen to the way the distortion is, we've been using distortion boxes for 50 years now, 40 years. But if you listen to especially metal guitar players and how they have used distortion to change the voice of the guitar, it is very violinish. It does not seem to be a leap. Am I close to that? I mean, do you understand?
Definitely. I think the biggest thing that a guitar player would try to achieve that a violin player can do naturally is the sustain. And it's because of the difference between picking and bowing. Like, I can achieve sustain with a bow as long as I want to. A guitar player needs to use some artificial pedals to help achieve that same sustain. So yeah, I think you're correct in saying that, certain tones are very similar. I find that I've done some Neil Schon solos and David Gilmour solos, especially, like, they're made for violin. I mean, those solos just translate so well to the violin. Some are easier than others. It went against every fiber of my being to learn Eddie Van Halen's style on a violin. It was so not violinistic at all, but it was a huge challenge for me. And then other things are like, oh yes, okay, David Gilmour, this is way easier for me. Not that the solo's easier, but that playing it on a violin is easier. So
yeah, well, vibrato happens to be the key to all of this, isn't it? Really learning vibrato. I think when I watch violin players, when I watch any stringed player, and I watch how their fingers are moving on the note when they're holding a note, learning vibrato for me was the greatest challenge. And the guitar players that have the best vibrato are my favorite guitar players. I like Leslie West, for example. I love David Gilmour, for example. I mean, these guys have just Neil Schon. They have Jimmy. They have amazing control and amazing vibrato. And you're right. We rely on other techniques to get us to bridge those tones and to get those tones that you guys have the luxury of having a bow, I guess, and being able to kind of do it. So tell me now, what is your goal at this point? Is it all original material? Is it making, I mean, we all know the record business is whatever the record business is, which is you pretty much do it on your own, although you may have a label. I don't know, but tell me about what is your vision as far as pursuing your original, your quest to be completely original.
So, like I said, I started doing these covers on social media during COVID. I already had my own show out there that I'm, mid-level entertainment. We're doing 1,500 seaters. We're not out there doing arenas. I'm not a, I don't have a hit song out there yet. But so I've got that going for me. And then I put out Eruption like I don't know, a month or two ago, went viral worldwide. And after that, people were asking me, well, what can you possibly do on the violin next? Like after you do that, that's like the holy grail of possible things you could do. And the only logical step is to put out an original album. And like, I thought about this before. I'm like, I don't want to put original music out into the world if I don't have an audience yet. I'm going to spend that kind of time and that kind of money to do something like this when I have, 600 followers or something like that. It doesn't make sense. So I wanted to release certain covers to build my audience prior to putting out original music. And I think I'm at the point now. We have busy tour schedule through June. July and August are pretty dead for us, not a lot of stuff going on. So I'm planning on using that time to put out, to get original stuff recorded and get ready to put out my first album. And the way I feel about it, I've never done anything that's forced. Like I never try to force anything. It's always kind of been fate. All of the good things that have happened, all the gigs I've been offered or the shows starting up, it's just kind of been like, do what you do it as good as you can do it. And if the right people will hear it and like it. And so I kind of feel that way about the album. I have all the tools that we need in my home studio to record at a high quality. I don't really need to go out and do it elsewhere. I grew up in the technology age. I don't have any experience with the way recording was prior to that. And I know that there's a pitfall of maybe sounding very sterile when you record that way. And so I like to try and remove that. I can lay stuff down and lay out ideas, but I still want live musicians on my tracks. I'm not going to completely, I don't want to go the route of all electronic everything, but it really helps to sketch out your ideas for songwriting that way. I play a lot of the instruments myself on it, but I'm not like a drummer by any means, so I will definitely, bring a drummer in when I do that sort of thing. But I think over the summer, I'm going to have that happen. This stuff is a little bit wild. I think it's different. I don't think anyone's going to have heard violins sound like this, and I'm going to have to make videos that accompany the music, or people will just think it's a guitar and it won't be that special because they'll think it's a guitar. So coupling YouTube videos along with the original album is going to be important, and after that I'll see what happens. I think like collaborations with some of my favorite performers would be something that I would be into in the future, not necessarily being a backing performer as like okay, I'm going to read string charts and be in the backing orchestra, but actually collaborating with what I do, on the electric violin, and not just being a section performer. Those kind of collaborations are things that I would be interested in the future. But I have good feeling that if I put out a quality product, that it will just keep going from there, because that's how my whole career has gone so far. Just do what you do as well as you can do it, and good things will happen.
Well, what they say, the definition of luck is opportunity meets preparation. I'm a big believer in that. You make your own luck because
Absolutely.
you work hard and you put yourself in a position to take advantage of the opportunities that come your way, which you exactly have you done. Do you ever see yourself collaborating with a singer? Where does that, because I know some brilliant players. Do you know Oz Noy? Do you another guitar player?
I've seen him live in I think I saw him at the bitter end, maybe.
Yeah. So Oz lives up the street. So we're good friends. He's bought guitars from me, and
Great player. Great.
he's a tremendous player. He's tremendous, and he's so out there. And I always say to Oz, have you ever? You've probably never seen him perform with a singer.
No,
you probably
I didn't
just
see him with a
watch
singer.
him all instrumental.
Right.
So Oz can be as crazy as he wants to out there with his own bands, and he is like totally insane, like insane. But I've also seen him with Adina Menzel, for example. I've seen him backing people. I've seen him with, he has a side project, I think it's called Ozone Squeeze, where he has a singer. Because I say to him, what do you want to do? How do you want to expand this? What do you want to, how far do you want to take it? When I look at artists like Tommy Emmanuel, another phenomenal player, I went to see him recently because I love his guitar playing. I think it's amazing. I thought to myself, is he just going to play guitar? And he sang. And he brought the opening act came out and sang songs with them at the end. And it just helped. You know, the point here is I see great players, phenomenal musicians, and I say to myself, is their dream, are they happy where they are? You know, is there stasis? Are they cool? They like to be where or do they see themselves in a wider stage, making more of an impact, increasing their coverage? And so when I watch you, it's so natural for me to think that, you know, because I'm a manager too. So that's what I think. I go, wow, what can she do? Like, how can she take this enormous talent and elevate it? And it seems that you are aware of where that will go, and you're just waiting for the opportunity to come by that maybe will give you the cosmic signal that is
Yeah.
the way to go.
I have to put it out there first. And like I said, make sure that the product is good. And I've thought about the singing thing. It's something that's come up. We do sing in our show, but we sing gang vocals. So the way I've written the arrangements for the strings is that we will do the verses with string arrangements. We will do the guitar solos on the strings, but we will sing the choruses of the song because those are the parts that everyone knows the words anyway in the audience. So while we're doing all this recognizable classic rock, prog, metal music, that's what we do in the show. We'll do gang style vocals. And I'm like, okay, now I'm at the point where I'm going to put out an original album very soon. The songs that I've written over the years, they're so diverse. Some of the stuff is very prog instrumental sounding. Some of it is very Bob Dylan sounding. You know, there's stuff that's very melodic. So do I hire a singer and bring a guest singer in, or do I try and do some of it? Or how am I going to do that? I mean, I would consider myself like a very mediocre singer. I can sing on pitch and I could sing some backing vocals, and I wouldn't consider myself a lead vocalist by any means, but I'm like, there have been very mediocre singers who have really worked hard, taken lessons, and learned how to become much better singers. Even in the current pop world, some of the best pop artists now weren't great singers. And I'm like, I'm kind of like, am I going to try and maybe I'll take some lessons? Luckily, being in the music scene that I am out west, I know a lot of great singers who could give me some lessons and see if I'm able to sing some of my own songs. I'm not sure yet. So I might give it a try and see if I could become better. Being a violinist, you know, you kind of have this anything is possible mentality because you're playing a lot of really hard shit your whole career. So, you know, I'll see, and then I'll probably be able to be the judge. I'm very good at that. I'll be like, you know, that's not going to cut it. That's not going to be at the same level as my violin playing. So I'm not going to do it, and I'll hire someone. Or maybe I'll be able to get through some of it and write for a style that'll suit my own voice. I don't know. But I think in terms of the album cohesiveness, it's probably going to be a little bit like Rush or Frank Zappa, where there's a mixture of instrumentals and vocals on the stuff. That's going to be what my style comes down to, probably.
You know, in 1973, there was a hit single called Brother Louie by Stories. Did you ever hear it?
I don't know that one.
Okay, well, it was number one. It was huge. And there's a violin solo with the guitar player. And I always laughed about it because it's the easiest riff in the world. I'm thinking they brought these incredibly astonishing, concert violinists in to read these charts that are the most, I don't know how to put it, the most, trust me, go on Spotify, put in Brother Louie by Stories. It was number one, right? It was the number one song in the country in 72 or 73 in the summer. Listen to the guitar solo and then listen to the violin playing along with it. And just kind of like, you'll go, wow, that would have been fun to do. That would have taken me about 5 seconds to play it because the guitar player is just going da 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 da, and the violin's going da 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 da. It's so rudimentary, and that just occurred to me while we were talking because
although it's not
everything. Sorry?
It's a pitfall though to think that, because not everything that's easy on the guitar is easy on the violin, and vice versa.
Whoa, let me just be clear about this. It sounds perfect for the song.
Right.
It worked. It's a hit record. It worked. You may listen to it and go, JJ, that was much more difficult than you think. But that's really not the point. Being is that's the only number one song I can remember where the violin has a major part of the guitar solo in the middle of the guitar solo. That's the point I'm trying to make. Also, keep in mind Santana's biggest record was when he hooked up with Rob Thomas, you know,
Right.
and then he Smooth, which probably paid for his retirement and his mansion because it sold 30 million records. So, you know, you're going to make the choices that you have to make. And I'm not telling you to sell out. You make the choices that you believe will maintain your credibility to your fans. I guess one last thing before I let you go, and I appreciate your time and I appreciate you working this thing out from the bucolic town that you are currently living in, Lewiston, New York, which is, it just sounds beautiful. What do you want to tell my listeners about how to watch you, what to look for as far as your future at this point?
Well, I would probably say if you have the chance to see the Femmes of Rock show coming through your town, it may sound like something you may not want to see, violins, you know, but it's a hard-hitting rock show, and it's funny and it's fun and it's definitely worth seeing. So if you want to see me do some of the stuff I do on social media live, you can see all of those solos in our show. You know, the Peter Frampton talk box thing on violin, Eruption, everything is in the show. And I think that my biggest thing is if you're tired of the current state of music and the stuff that's being churned out right now and you're ready for something different, that's what I'm going to be trying to do over the next few months. So, you know, follow along on my pages, and if you like it, great. If you don't,
Are you going
whatever.
to be coming to New York City?
We play Long Island. We played the Patchogue Theater on Long Island maybe about a year ago. I haven't played publicly in the city proper yet, but you know, maybe in the future we'll definitely be coming back to Long Island. But I'd love to meet you in the real life someday, and if you ever want to attend a show in the area, you know, for sure.
I would love to, and I'm not going to tell you to cover We're Not Going to Take It or I Want to Rock, because that would just be too cheap. But if you cover Under the Blade, that may be interesting. But because I can almost hear that.
Tossed the idea around. I'm always adding new medleys to the show, and I wanted to add like we have an 80s rock medley where we do like Motley Crue and Van Halen and stuff. And
hey, in that case.
But I wanted to add like a party song medley, and that was at the top of the list. So it's probably coming. By the time we would get to New York City, it's probably coming. So
well, if you decide to do that, I guess I'll have to really promote the hell out of it.
Yeah, or maybe get on stage with us when we do it. So
I'd love to. Listen, you come to New York, there's the City Winery is a beautiful place to play. I mean, there's a lot of different venues. Ultimately, you get to the Beacon Theater, which kind of is like a gold standard for a lot of artists. If you can do consistent nights at the Beacon, you've really gotten there. You know, you've really kind of, Joe Bonamassa, I look at Joe as a perfect example of someone who does what he wants to do, but he's reached a level of success that he can do it on his terms. I respect it so much. He doesn't care about the mega. He goes, you know what? I'll be selling my couple 100,000 albums, whatever, and then I can play multiple nights in cities all across America in 3,000 seaters. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that, really. That's really it. You don't necessarily need to go to the Garden. I mean, that would be cool too if you could, but I think if you could sustain a career like that, you sustained a hell of a career. And I wish you all the best, Nina. I really do. I think you're incredibly talented. I think your videos are great. They're a lot of fun. I urge people who listen to this to go online and watch you and your videos. They're great. Thank you for being on the show.
thank you. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.